In general, it can be said that feedback is more directed towards the negative, but in fact, the community of supporters of this franchise is always unhappy. Today I intend to review the published information of the series and its impact on the future of franchise games. First, let's take a look at the information and events of the series and then go to the possible effects on the games. The series begins in 2022 as Albert Wesker, starring Lance Reddick, takes his two daughters to New Raccoon City. Umbrella has again built a new empire for itself and is working on a project called Joy with Wesker's help. This time, the project becomes even more problematic than the T-virus in its outbreak in 1998, and it spreads widely so that finally, after 14 years, in 2036, there is nothing left but an apocalyptic world of human rule. And now we will follow the story of Wesker's daughter, Jade Wesker, who, alongside trying to survive in this wild world with the past, his father's connection to what happened to the birth and the fate of his sister Billy is struggling. This is all the information we have about the serial fictional process. Now let's look at the impact of the games in this series and answer some of the questions you're likely to have in your head. One of the most controversial things that has rattled fans is the return of Albert Wesker with a completely different face. First, I have to say that we're talking about Netflix, a company that has a passion for social issues and portraying them in its products, so we should have been surprised if Albert Wesker's skin color had not changed. But other than that, one of the things that the creators of the series have stated is that all their games and events are considered canon for the series. This means that all the events, including the destruction of Raccoon City, the death of Albert Wesker in the volcano, the events of the 6th, 7th and even 8th editions, have all occurred in the serial world as well. Now you might ask yourself, how might Albert Wesker have come alive? Umbrella seems to have somehow brought him back from the dead. The creators stated that Wesker had returned for a justified and important reason, and that, in their own words, they were not going to excuse his return from death under pretexts such as anti-RPG vest or anti-lava. They have also announced that we are going to meet some familiar characters in the series. This issue of the series canon raises many important questions that I don't really know how creators can answer and justify them in 8 episodes at the same time. For example, are Wesker and his daughters aware of Jake Muller's existence, and are we going to meet him in the series? Jake Muller, in my opinion, is among the HIGHER.T characters of this franchise, whose potential was not well utilized as the son of the most attractive franchise antagonist. Who knows that we may finally see him return in the series. In the 7th edition, we saw the introduction of Blue Umbrella. Were they actually trying to bring Umbrella back to the stage, or are they even unaware of Umbrella's existence? My theory is that some of Umbrella's former employees have been looking to revive it from the very beginning of the closure of this company, and I think I have very strong reasons that I will address it in the next section. Truly, this game is so dead that I think I'm one of the few people who finished the campaign section, and since I love lore this franchise and I'm spreading my own information with every version, this game was no exception, and personally I think there's been some very interesting references in that game to the expansion of Umbrella and the return of Albert Wesker. Personally, I haven't seen anyone mention the flows of the Umbrella core game, and maybe it's because many think it's not for lore franchise canon while it's not true. The game also takes place in lore, the original versions of franchises, and my personal theory is that the currents of the game are directly related to the series. Some of its events are justified. Since you probably haven't experienced this game, or if you've experienced it, you probably haven't paid attention to the story that's been going on in the background of the game. So come along with me to review the game's very interesting connections and adapt it to the serial streams. It is true that the game did not have a coherent campaign section, but at the beginning of each stage, using texts, we were provided with information about the progress of the background story of the game. You were tasked in that game with constantly collecting combat data and various DNA samples from dead BOWs in different areas of previous titles that have not yet been completely cleared, and we may see Easter eggs or references to these during the series. We know that the T-virus plays an important role in this series and the construction of Joy, but where did the company get access to T-virus samples? I think you can also see the connection that I'm witnessing. The game also referred directly to Umbrella in the Shadows, and personally I don't think it meant Blue Umbrella. In this game, you play a mercenary named 3A7 who was under the supervision of Abraham Jackson and after his disappearance under Beatrice Bertrand. The story of the game is going on shortly after the streams of the 6th edition. During your operations, there is talk of a person named the Executive who is responsible for forming this group of mercenaries to collect the mentioned samples and is apparently a very powerful person in the company, and even many of the company's top officials are unaware of his identity. Now who has close supervision over the construction of Joy in the series? That's right, Wesker. I think many of the samples collected by 3A7 have finally made their way to the Joy Project. Jackson decides to investigate this but quickly identifies and disappears. Bertrand then takes responsibility for overseeing operations 3A7, and after a while he receives an order to kill this mercenary during his operation, which ultimately saves 3A7 despite all the hardships, and almost leads Bertrand to conclude that this mercenary is actually Hunk. Finally, the new Grim Reaper adjective is awarded to 3A7, which is very interesting. But let me draw your attention to the executive. This person apparently has a lot of information from areas like the Spanish village of the 4th edition and the disappearance of Ashley Graham, as well as most other areas, such as Kijuju and Antarctic Base, and even in part of the game Jackson says, he talks about these places as if he were there himself. If you remember, Albert Wesker has been in many of these places and played an important role in the streams of the 4th version, which we saw in the additional content of Separate Ways. Another issue that refers to Wesker behind the identity of the executive. On the other hand, the voiceover of Albert Wesker's character, D.C. Douglas, was also re-voiced in the game, which was heard on some match. So years ago it was revealed that Wesker was alive, and now the series is going to explain more about this and how. This is only a theory on my behalf, and since a few people experienced this title, it's really unlikely that many of those people even remember this game, and that's why no one mentions this information. But personally, I think Umbrella Corps' currents and events are definitely directly related to serial streams. Personally, for years, I no longer excited for live-action or animated franchise products. The last time I was for one of franchise's animations was to 2017 and Vendetta Animation, which I thought was a disgusting and offensive tragedy to the whole franchise that I don't even want to think about. Since then, we are all aware of Resident Evil's status in the field of movies and series. Infinite Darkness Animation was an incredibly mediocre animation, and the film Welcome to Raccoon City was made solely to give the director his own hatred for the franchise, and especially Leon, in the form of a poor quality film to fans. I can't really imagine anyone on the film's team caring even a little bit about this franchise and its fans. Paul W.S. Anderson's films, whose assignment is clear. While they cannot be referred to as good films, they at least had their own style. To be honest, I enjoyed his first film, released in 2002, and sometimes I watch it again. It was fascinating for me to see Resident Evil in the form of a movie during that period. One of the positive and respectable features of Paul Anderson's film series was his risk-taking and taking a completely new way in franchises based on its peculiarities rather than portraying the story of games with a bit of a change in the form of a film. But is the series going to suffer the same fate as franchise's recent cinematic and animated productions? Personally, I don't think so. Netflix has provided the creators with a decent budget, and this is well known in the CGI context of each bow. Something that we haven't seen in almost any of the movies of this franchise to date. Like Paul Anderson's films, the series, on the other hand, will tell a new story based on lore franchises, which can be fascinating. But the most important issue is how to implement its story. Putting all franchise games to date as canon for the series could be its savior or its killer. For example, a character like Albert Wesker, who has been a very clever character and always thinking about power, how can he be so calm now and again make himself a slave to Umbrella and its destructive plans? If the series does not follow a logical story, it will definitely face a lot of anger, although many have already lined up around the series and watching it. The Walking Dead is one of the franchises that I'm personally very fond of, but I don't think it's the right thing to do with Resident Evil. While both franchises are based on zombies, they have very important structural and fundamental differences with each other. What always made Resident Evil attractive has been its location limitations and its flow in closed locations. The franchise had never been to very broad apocalyptic scenarios before, while The Walking Dead is built on this an apocalyptic world, portraying it very well. This could take the series somewhat away from the familiar sense of franchise games that certainly won't be welcome for many fans. One of my personal concerns is the way the series is played. While it is a little early to talk about this, the success or failure of the series can have a significant impact on this issue. When Capcom has allowed creators to make all lore franchises the foreground of their series, what can stop them in canon putting the series for series games if it succeeds? If the series succeeds, Capcom may think about modeling some of the scenarios of the series, such as the end of the world, and using it in games. While it is unlikely that we will see exactly the same scenario as the series in the future of franchises, we may see serious patterns of its process. Personally, I don't want the franchise to go any way towards the apocalyptic world. These patternings can contradict the structure of franchise games and ultimately interfere with the presentation of a survival fear experience. But who knows? All of these issues are possibilities, and the only time to determine the results and effects of the series on franchises is. In general, the series carries many tasks on its shoulders that determine its success seriously. While many fans called it awful from the start, I personally would love to give a Resident Evil live action after a long time. As a person who, over the years, I've been extremely immersed in lore franchises and I'm aware of the details, it's very important to know how the creators are going to use them in this series. And the least I expect from this series and its creators is to present a logical and respectable story. Some issues, such as the changes that Wesker's character has had for Netflix policy reasons, are definitely annoying to me. But while I keep my hopes down on it, I'm eager to see how the series will turn out. What do you think of this series and its connections to franchise games? Will you watch it on July 14th? Share your comments with me.